Hello, and welcome to The Brief Insight, your go to podcast for breaking down the latest trends, research, and policies shaping our world. Whether you're passionate about sustainability, global economics, or emerging innovations, this is where we simplify complex ideas to keep you informed and inspired. If you enjoy what you hear, don't forget to like this episode, subscribe to our channel, and share it with anyone looking for insights that matter. We're here every Monday and Friday, so hit that notification bell to stay updated. Your support helps us grow and continue bringing you sharp, relevant content that sparks conversation. Thank you for tuning into The Brief Insight. Now let's dive into today's topic.
Okay, so today we're diving into something pretty heavy.
Yeah,
The environmental cost of war.
it's a big one.
It is a big one, and you sent me some dense articles,
Okay.
research articles to look through, and I have to admit, I usually think about war, in terms of the human cost. Obviously the tragedy and the geopolitical shifts,
Sure.
but the environmental fallout.
Yeah.
That's something I haven't really thought about before.
Yeah, it's a blind spot for a lot of people. I think we tend to focus on, the immediate consequences of conflict.
Right, right.
But, these articles reveal a hidden cost,
Yeah.
a kind of ripple effect that extends way beyond the battlefield and lingers long after the fighting stops.
Yeah, it's like there's this whole other war going on.
Yeah,
A silent war
totally.
against the planet itself.
Yeah.
And one of the things that really surprised me in these articles was just the sheer scale of the military's carbon footprint.
Yeah.
I mean, get this. The U.S. military alone generates more greenhouse gas emissions than some entire countries.
Yeah. It's true. And it's a stark illustration of how the military-industrial complex,
Right?
even in peacetime, is a major contributor to climate change.
Yeah.
You think about it, right? The constant production and operation of tanks, jets, warships,
Yeah.
bases all around the world.
Yeah, it's huge.
It's a massive, energy-intensive enterprise.
Yeah, and these articles estimate that globally, militaries contribute like a whopping 5.5%
Yeah.
of total greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, it's not an insignificant...
That's not a small number.
No, not at all.
Yet, it often gets left out of the climate change conversation.
It does, and there's a reason for that.
Okay.
It's called the military emissions gap.
Oh, okay.
You see, data on military emissions is often classified
Ah,
or lumped in with civilian figures, making it really difficult to track
right.
and hold militaries accountable
Okay.
for their environmental impact.
So we have this massive industry essentially operating in a climate accounting black hole.
Pretty much, yeah.
That seems like a major obstacle if we're serious about addressing climate change.
It is, and it raises a crucial question.
Okay.
Can we really tackle climate change
Yeah.
without addressing the military's role in it?
Right.
The Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement both exempted military emissions from reporting,
Oh, wow.
citing national security concerns,
Yeah.
which are understandable.
Right.
But this lack of transparency
Yeah.
makes it incredibly difficult to develop effective solutions.
Yeah, it feels like we're missing this huge piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
But it's not just about the emissions from military operations themselves, right?
Right.
These articles also talk about how war, directly impacts the environment.
For sure.
In some pretty disturbing ways.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Think about the destruction of ecosystems, the release of stored carbon from burning oil wells and forests,
Yeah.
the toxic legacy of weapons like Agent Orange in Vietnam or depleted uranium munitions.
Right.
The environmental scars of war can last for generations.
The example of the Mesopotamian marshes in the article on the Russia-Ukraine war was horrifying.
Oh, yeah.
A vital ecosystem shrunk by 90% due to deliberate draining.
It's crazy.
And speaking of Ukraine, the ongoing conflict there highlights how water can become both a casualty and a weapon of war.
Yes. The damage to infrastructure has left millions without access to safe water,
Right.
leading to immediate humanitarian crises and long-term health concerns.
Right.
And then we see the deliberate flooding of areas to slow enemy advances,
Right.
a tactic with unforeseen environmental consequences
Yeah.
that we're only beginning to grasp.
It's a reminder that even the most basic necessities, like clean water,
Yeah,
become entangled in the chaos of conflict.
totally.
And it's not just about the immediate impact either.
Right.
These articles also delve into the hidden dangers that linger long after the fighting stops,
Yeah.
like landmines and radiation.
Unexploded ordnance contaminating soil and water,
Right.
making areas unsafe for decades.
Yeah.
And children often being the most vulnerable victims.
It's a tragic legacy that highlights the enduring cost of war.
It is.
And then there's the invisible threat of radiation.
Right.
The articles mention wild boars in Ukraine with high radiation levels linked to pre-Chernobyl nuclear tests.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder what other radioactive remnants are lurking out there.
Total.
Ticking time bombs waiting to go off.
Yeah, the long-term health and environmental effects of radiation exposure
Right.
are often difficult to quantify.
Yeah.
But the potential consequences are immense.
Yeah.
We're talking about genetic mutations, cancer, birth defects, contamination of the food chain.
Right.
These are issues that can haunt a region for generations.
It's like a wound that never fully heals.
Yeah.
You can rebuild a bridge or a power plant.
Right.
But how do you restore a contaminated ecosystem or undo the genetic damage caused by radiation?
That's the insidious nature of these hidden costs. They often go unaccounted for in the aftermath of war.
Yeah.
But their impact can be devastating and far-reaching.
And it brings us to a crucial question. Can we green the military?
Right.
Is it possible to balance national security with environmental responsibility? That seems like a tall order.
It is.
I mean, we're talking about an industry built on power and destruction.
Right.
Can you really make that sustainable?
It's certainly a complex challenge.
Yeah.
But these articles suggest that there are steps we can take,
Okay.
even within the constraints of national security.
Okay.
For example, there's been growing interest in developing sustainable fuels for military vehicles
Right.
and exploring renewable energy sources for bases.
But isn't one of the biggest obstacles the fact that military technology often has a really long lifespan?
It does, yes.
You can't just swap out a fighter jet for a solar-powered plane overnight.
You can't. No, the long life cycles of military equipment pose a significant challenge.
Yeah.
Even if we started developing super eco-friendly military tech today,
Right.
it would take decades for those older, less efficient systems to be phased out.
So it's not just about finding greener alternatives. It's about rethinking the entire military-industrial complex. That seems like a monumental task.
It is, but it's a necessary one.
Yeah.
If we're serious about addressing the environmental cost of war,
Right.
we need to start thinking about sustainability from the very beginning.
Yeah.
From the design and manufacturing of equipment to the way we train and deploy our forces.
And maybe it also requires a shift in mindset, right?
Absolutely.
Instead of seeing the environment as something separate from national security.
Yeah.
What if we viewed it as integral to our security?
Precisely because climate change, resource scarcity, and natural disasters.
Yeah.
These are all threats that can destabilize regions and lead to conflict.
Right.
So in a way, investing in environmental protection is also an investment in peace and security.
It's like that saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Exactly.
But I'm curious, are there any examples of militaries actually taking steps to reduce their environmental impact?
Yep.
Or is this mostly just talk?
Well, there are some encouraging signs. A few countries have started experimenting with biofuels for certain vehicles,
Okay.
and some military bases are incorporating renewable energy sources.
So it's a start.
It is.
But it sounds like we're still in the very early stages of greening the military.
Absolutely. And there are still major hurdles to overcome.
Yeah.
But what's encouraging is that there seems to be a growing awareness
Okay.
within the military itself of the need to address environmental concerns.
Okay.
Some military leaders are starting to acknowledge that a healthy environment is essential for mission readiness and long-term security.
Well, that's good to hear, but I have to admit I'm still struggling to wrap my head around the sheer scale of this problem.
Yep.
It's like we've been waging war on the planet without even realizing it.
It's a sobering realization, and it underscores the need for more research,
Yeah.
more transparency, and a more open dialogue
Yeah.
about the environmental consequences of our actions,
Right.
both in times of war and peace.
Well said. And speaking of consequences, one of the articles mentioned something that really stuck with me.
Okay.
The impact of war on cultural heritage.
Yeah.
Something I hadn't considered before,
Yeah.
but it makes sense.
Absolutely. The destruction of cultural sites, monuments, artifacts.
Right.
It's a tragic loss that often gets overshadowed by the immediate human toll of war.
Right.
But these cultural treasures represent the history, the identity, the soul of a people.
Yeah.
Their loss is a wound that runs deep.
The article on the Russia-Ukraine war had some sobering statistics from UNESCO.
Oh, yeah?
Hundreds of cultural sites damaged or destroyed in the conflict.
It's terrible.
It's a stark reminder that war doesn't just destroy lives and infrastructure, it also erases history and leaves a void that can be difficult, if not impossible, to fill.
It's a loss that diminishes us all, and it highlights the urgent need to protect cultural heritage.
Right.
especially in times of conflict.
Yeah.
These sites are not just bricks and mortar.
Yeah.
They're repositories of memory, identity, and shared human experience.
It's like Milan Kundera wrote, "The way to liquidate nations is to take away their memory and destroy their books, culture, and history."
Wow.
That quote really sent chills down my spine. It makes you realize the power of cultural destruction,
Yeah.
the way it can be used to erase entire peoples and their legacies.
And sadly, it's a tactic that has been used throughout history, from the destruction of the Library of Alexandria to the countless cultural treasures lost during World War II.
Right.
The erasure of cultural heritage is a recurring tragedy that underscores the interconnectedness of war and the preservation of our shared human story.
It's a sobering thought, and it makes you wonder what other hidden costs of war we might be overlooking.
Yeah.
What are the long-term consequences that we haven't even begun to grasp?
It's a question worth pondering, and it's one that these articles encourage us to confront.
Right.
Because ultimately, if we want to create a more peaceful and sustainable future,
Yeah.
we need to understand the full cost of our actions,
Yeah.
both the visible and the invisible, the immediate and the long-lasting.
Well said. And speaking of lasting consequences, one of the articles mentioned something that really caught my attention.
Okay.
The impact of war on energy infrastructure.
Right.
It's not something we often think about, but it makes sense when you consider how vital energy is to modern society.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The article on the Russia-Ukraine war provided a detailed account of the damage inflicted on Ukraine's energy system.
Yeah.
Power plants, transmission lines, oil and gas facilities all targeted,
Right.
leaving millions without access to electricity and heating, especially during the harsh winter months.
It's a devastating tactic that not only cripples a nation's economy, but also has severe humanitarian consequences.
Yeah.
Imagine trying to survive without heat, light, or running water in the middle of a war zone.
Right.
It's unimaginable.
It is, and it highlights the vulnerability of our modern interconnected world.
Right.
A single well-placed attack can have cascading effects,
Yeah.
disrupting essential services and creating chaos and suffering on a massive scale.
It's a stark reminder that the things we take for granted,
Totally.
flipping a switch for light, turning on a tap for water,
Yeah,
these are luxuries that can vanish in an instant during times of conflict.
exactly. And it's not just about the immediate disruption.
Right.
The long-term economic and environmental consequences of these attacks can be enormous.
Yeah.
Rebuilding a damaged energy infrastructure takes time, resources, and expertise,
Yeah.
all of which are scarce during wartime.
And then there's the environmental impact to consider.
Right.
Damaged power plants can release harmful pollutants. Oil spills can contaminate water sources.
Yeah.
And the disruption of energy supplies can lead to increased reliance on less sustainable alternatives,
Absolutely.
like burning whatever you can find just to stay warm.
It's a vicious cycle.
Hmm.
War damages the environment, which in turn exacerbates existing problems and creates new ones.
Right.
It's a reminder that we need to break this cycle if we want to create a more sustainable and peaceful future.
It's like we're trapped in this self-destructive loop, and we need to find a way to step off the merry-go-round.
We do.
But how do we do that?
Yeah.
Where do we even begin?
Well, I think these articles offer some potential pathways forward.
Okay.
They highlight the need to rethink our approach to energy security and conflict resolution.
Right.
It's about moving beyond a narrow focus on national self-interest
Yeah.
and embracing a more global perspective.
That sounds like a tall order.
It is.
But I guess the first step is acknowledging the problem, right?
But
We
the-
can't fix what we don't see.
Exactly. And these articles are helping us to see more clearly the hidden costs of war,
Right.
the intricate ways in which conflict impacts not just people,
Yeah.
but also the planet we all share.
And speaking of impact, one area we haven't touched on yet is the impact of war on healthcare systems.
Oh, right.
It seems obvious that war would strain healthcare resources.
It does.
But I'm curious to delve a little deeper into the specific challenges and long-term consequences.
Yeah, the impact of war on healthcare is often devastating and multifaceted. It's not just about treating physical injuries sustained in combat.
Right.
It's about the disruption of healthcare services, the shortage of essential medicines,
Yeah.
the psychological trauma inflicted on individuals and communities,
Yeah.
the displacement of people, the spread of disease, and the long-term health consequences of exposure to pollutants and toxins.
One of the articles mentioned that in the Russia-Ukraine war alone, Russia has attacked over 700 medical facilities,
It's awful.
resulting in countless casualties and further straining an already overburdened healthcare system.
Yeah.
It's absolutely appalling.
It is. Hospitals and healthcare workers should be protected, not targeted.
Right.
They are essential for saving lives and alleviating suffering, especially during times of conflict.
Right.
Attacking them is a violation of international law and a betrayal of our shared humanity.
It's a stark reminder that the cost of war extends far beyond the battlefield,
It does.
impacting every aspect of society, including the most vulnerable among us. And the long-term consequences can be profound. The psychological trauma of war can linger for generations,
For sure.
impacting individuals, families, and entire communities.
Absolutely. And the displacement of people caused by conflict can lead to further strain on healthcare systems,
Yeah.
as well as social and economic upheaval. It's a ripple effect that can be felt for decades.
It paints a rather bleak picture.
It does.
But it's important to acknowledge these costs.
It is.
If we want to make informed decisions about war and peace,
Yeah.
we can't just focus on the immediate human toll. We need to consider the long-term consequences for individual societies and the planet as a whole.
I completely agree. And that brings us to another crucial aspect of this discussion.
Okay.
The impact of war on transportation infrastructure.
Right. It seems obvious that war would damage roads, bridges, railways.
It does.
But I'm curious to learn more about the strategic implications of these attacks
Yeah.
and the long-term economic and social costs.
Well, the article on the Russia-Ukraine war highlighted the widespread damage inflicted on Ukraine's transportation infrastructure.
Right.
Roads, bridges, railways, and ports have all been targeted,
Yeah.
essentially crippling the nation's ability to move goods, people, and military equipment.
It's like cutting off the arteries of a country,
It is.
disrupting supply chains, isolating communities, and hindering economic activity.
Precisely. And it can have cascading effects.
Yeah.
Think about the impact on food distribution, access to healthcare emergency response efforts,
Right.
and the overall functioning of society. When transportation systems are disrupted, everything grinds to a halt.
The article mentioned that in Ukraine alone, hundreds of bridges have been destroyed and thousands of kilometers of roads have been damaged.
It's incredible.
It's a staggering amount of destruction that will take years and billions of dollars to repair.
And it's not just about the physical infrastructure itself. It's about the disruption of the systems that rely on that infrastructure. The loss of skilled workers, the damage to equipment, the increased costs of transportation. These all have a ripple effect on the economy and on people's lives.
It's a reminder that war is incredibly costly,
It is.
not just in terms of human life, but also in terms of the damage it inflicts on the things we rely on for our daily existence.
Yeah,
And that cost is often borne by those who are least able to afford it.
right.
The civilians who are caught in the crossfire, the communities that are displaced, the countries that are struggling to rebuild.
It's a sobering thought, and it raises a crucial question.
Yeah.
Is there a way to wage war without causing so much collateral damage?
Right.
Is it possible to minimize the impact on civilians' infrastructure and the environment?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
There's a way to make war less destructive.
It's a complex issue, and there are no easy answers, but it's a question we need to be asking if we want to create a more humane and sustainable world.
One of the articles suggested that there are steps we can take to reduce the environmental impact of military operations, even in times of conflict.
Okay.
Things like using more sustainable fuels, developing greener technologies, and incorporating environmental considerations into military planning and decision-making.
Those are all positive steps,
Yeah.
and they point to a potential shift in mindset,
Right.
a recognition that environmental protection and national security are not mutually exclusive goals.
Right. It's about acknowledging that a healthy environment is essential for the well-being of all people, both in times of war and peace.
And it's about finding ways to work together across borders and ideologies
Yeah.
to address the shared challenges we face, from climate change to conflict resolution.
Like, we're missing a huge chunk of the climate change equation.
Yeah.
It's almost like the military gets a free pass when it comes to emissions, right?
Well, it's not quite that simple.
Yeah.
There are legitimate national security concerns about revealing too much information about military operations. But this lack of transparency creates a real dilemma.
Okay.
How do we hold militaries accountable for their environmental impact without compromising national security?
Right.
It's a tough question.
Yeah, it feels like we're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
On the one hand, we need transparency to address climate change effectively.
Right.
But on the other hand, we can't just ignore the very real threats that nations face.
Right.
So how do we reconcile those competing priorities?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, and there are no easy answers. But I think one potential solution is to find ways to increase transparency, without compromising sensitive information.
Okay.
For example, maybe we could develop standardized methodologies for measuring military emissions that aggregate data in a way that protects national security,
Right.
while still providing a more accurate picture of the military's overall climate impact.
So it's like finding that balance
Well, it is.
where you can blur out the details. Right.
But still show the overall shapes of the picture.
Yeah.
But even if we could get a better handle on measuring military emissions,
Right.
the question remains, how do we actually reduce those emissions?
Right.
As we discussed earlier, greening the military is a complex challenge,
It is.
especially given the long life cycles of military technology.
Yes.
We can't just swap out a fleet of fighter jets for electric planes overnight.
We can't, no. But there are promising solutions being explored. For example, some militaries are experimenting with sustainable aviation fuels made from renewable sources like algae or agricultural waste.
Okay, so
Yeah.
biofuels for planes, that's interesting.
Yeah,
But I imagine there are some logistical hurdles to overcome.
there are.
I mean, fueling a single jet is one thing,
Yeah.
but what about a whole fleet of aircraft?
You're absolutely right. Scaling up production and distribution of sustainable fuels
Right.
to meet the needs of a modern military is a monumental undertaking.
And then there's the issue of compatibility. Not all engines can run on biofuels without modifications.
So it's not just a simple swap,
No, it's not a quick fix.
but even beyond finding alternative fuels,
Yeah.
seems like there's a bigger challenge here.
Yeah,
Rethinking the entire military paradigm.
right. Precisely. It's not just about swapping out one technology for another.
Right.
It's about fundamentally rethinking how we design, manufacture, and operate military systems.
Okay.
For example, could we incorporate more lightweight materials into the construction of vehicles to reduce fuel consumption?
Right.
Could we design bases to be more energy efficient
Right.
and reliant on renewable energy sources?
Okay.
Could we use artificial intelligence to optimize logistics and reduce waste?
Those are some intriguing ideas.
Yeah.
It sounds like we need to approach this problem with a completely different mindset.
I think so.
Not just trying to tweak the edges of the existing system,
Yeah.
but imagining a whole new way of doing things.
Absolutely. And I think that shift in mindset is starting to happen.
Okay.
There's growing recognition, even within the military itself,
Okay.
that environmental sustainability is not just a nice to have.
Yeah.
It's a mission-critical issue.
Well, that's encouraging.
It is.
But I have to admit, I'm still a bit skeptical.
Okay.
Can you really have a green military that's still capable of defending a nation?
Right.
Don't those two goals seem inherently at odds?
It's certainly a balancing act.
Yeah.
But I think it's a false dichotomy to suggest that we have to choose between a strong national defense
Right.
and a healthy environment.
Okay.
In fact, as we discussed earlier, a healthy environment is essential for long-term security.
Right.
Climate change, resource scarcity, natural disasters.
Yeah.
These are all threats that could destabilize regions
Right.
and lead to conflict.
So you're saying that investing in environmental protection is actually a way of investing in national security?
Exactly. It's about recognizing that our security is inextricably linked to the health of the planet. If we want to create a more secure world, we need to address the root causes of conflict.
Yeah.
And that includes environmental degradation.
Oh, okay. I'm starting to see the connection.
Right.
But even if we embrace this more holistic view of security,
Right.
how do we actually translate that into concrete action?
Yeah.
Where do we start?
Well, I think one important step is to foster greater collaboration between the military and the scientific community.
Okay.
We need scientists and engineers working alongside military leaders
Right.
to develop innovative solutions that meet the needs of both national security and environmental sustainability.
So bringing the best minds from different fields
Exactly.
to bear on this problem.
Yes.
But it's not just about technology, is it?
It's not.
It's also about changing attitudes and behaviors.
You're absolutely right. We need to cultivate a culture of environmental responsibility within the military itself.
Okay.
That means training soldiers to understand the environmental impact of their actions, developing sustainable practices for everything from waste management to energy use,
Okay.
and promoting a sense of stewardship for the planet.
So it's about a shift in mindset, not just for the military, but for society as a whole.
It is.
We need to start seeing environmental protection not as something separate from national security,
Right.
but as integral to it.
Precisely because ultimately our security, our well-being, our very survival depends on a healthy planet.
Yeah.
And that recognition needs to be at the forefront of our thinking, not just in times of war, but in times of peace as well.
Well said. Okay, so we've talked about the challenges of greening the military.
Yeah.
But what about the flip side?
Okay.
What are the benefits of a more sustainable military?
There are many potential benefits both for the military itself and for society as a whole. For example, reducing reliance on fossil fuels
Okay.
could make the military less vulnerable to supply chain disruptions and price volatility.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
So being more sustainable could actually enhance military readiness and resilience.
Exactly. And there are other potential benefits. For example, developing renewable energy sources for bases could reduce the need to transport fuel to remote locations,
Right.
which is not only costly but also risky.
That makes sense. And what about the environmental benefits? I mean, reducing the military's carbon footprint would obviously be good for the planet.
Right.
But are there any other benefits?
Absolutely. Investing in environmental restoration and conservation efforts
Okay.
could help to mitigate the damage caused by past military activities
All right.
and contribute to a healthier planet for everyone.
It's like turning a negative into a positive.
Yeah.
Instead of just trying to minimize the harm,
Right.
the military could actually be a force for environmental good.
Exactly.
That's a powerful idea.
It is, and it speaks to the potential for the military to be a leader in sustainability.
Yeah.
Imagine if the military, with its vast resources and technological capabilities, were to fully embrace the goal of environmental protection.
Yeah.
The impact could be transformative.
I like the way you think it's about reimagining the role of the military in the 21st century.
Yes.
Instead of just being a force for destruction, it could also be a force for healing and regeneration.
Exactly. It's about shifting the narrative from a narrow focus on military might
Right?
to a broader understanding of security that encompasses environmental sustainability, social justice, and the well-being of all people.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. It's been a fascinating and challenging conversation, but I feel like we've only just begun to scratch the surface of this complex issue.
We have, but hopefully this conversation has sparked some new ideas, challenged some assumptions, and inspired you to continue exploring these issues on your own.
Absolutely. And I want to encourage everyone listening to check out the show notes. Our goal is to empower you to continue learning and engaging with these issues, because ultimately creating a more peaceful and sustainable future is a collective responsibility. We all have a role to play.
And as we move forward, let's remember the words of the Dalai Lama. Just as ripples spread out when a single pebble is dropped into water, the actions of individuals can have far-reaching effects.
So let's be those pebbles. Let's create those ripples, and let's work together to build a world where peace and sustainability prevail.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep striving to make a difference.